The theme of this year is Yosef and his brothers. We started with Vayeshev. And it's about Golus. And there are three principles in the Golus of Yosef and his brothers' story. There's Yaakov himself. There's Yosef Atzadik's brothers, and then there's Yosef himself. Each one of them, in Genesis, in Bereshis, goes into Golus and is somehow redeemed from the Golus. Meaning to say, Yaakov goes into Mitzrayim, the Shvatim go into Mitzrayim, Yosef is in Mitzrayim, but they have mastered their Golus. Meaning to say, they went into Golus, they went through a process of Golusization, for lack of words, but the real people who are going to pay are their children. In other words, next year's syllabus, which is going to be the slavery and redemption, the Jewish people going in and out, that's where the real Golus is. Meaning to say, the Golus of this year, which is the process by which, for lack of words, the Avos lose control. The Avos Ha'olam, the holiest people in the world, who are so connected to Hashem Yisbarach, Hashem throws them curveballs. They're not in control. They have to manage it. Yaakov in his way, Yosef in his way, Shvatim in his way, but they do manage. The children are going to be thrown curveballs and they're not going to manage. The Golus is going to get dark and painful and difficult and concealing. And the journey of this year has been the journey of the Golus of these three principles. And more recently, we learned about each one's redemption. Yosef's redemption is Vayimi Kates. The brothers' redemption is V'lo Yachol Yosef. And Yankov's redemption is Ha'od Avichai. These are all ideas that we devoted weeks to, whole classes to. They come into Egypt. Yaakov Avinu is happy to go, but worried. Happy to go because he sees the advantages, but at the same time he realizes that he's giving something up, and the Eibush tells him, don't be afraid, go. And he comes to Mitzrayim. And of course, the most recent conversation we had, on his way to Mitzrayim, he builds a Beis HaTalmud, he sends Yehuda to make a yeshiva. And that's a perfect example of extreme. You have to make a yeshiva where Yosef HaTzadik lives. And the Teretz says Yosef HaTzadik is an Adam. Adam means a little of this, and 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 a little of this. A yeshiva is only Torah. And you need a yeshiva. A behema, extreme, but a good behema, you understand? So Yosef represents the Adam in light of the class I just gave you in Siddur. So Yaakov Avinu says, I'm sure Yosef has Torah, and he has Gemilas Chasodim, and he has everything. We want a yeshiva, a Beis HaTalmud, we're a place that all they do is learn Torah. And then they come into Mitzrayim, and they survive the Golus. So here's something very interesting. We know the Jewish people are called Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Right? Jews have many names. But every name that the Jewish people are called collectively has to have a meaning. We're Bnei Avraham, we're Bnei Yitzchak, Bnei Yaakov. We're called in a different context. Bnei Yisrael, right? Yisrael, it says in the Bnei B'chaya, means Yaakov is called Yisrael, Yitzchak is called Yisrael, and Avraham is called Yisrael. Yisrael is sort of the generic name of all the others, as they state in the Bnei B'chaya. So every time you give a Jew a name, there has to be a reason. V'neichi tirgalti le'Ephraim. Kocha, Mazra Yosef, Yidna called Ephraim, and there's a whole reason why Klal Yisrael is called Ephraim. One of the many allusions to the collective Jew is Yosef. This Sikha revolves around the idea that the whole Jewish nation is called Yosef. They were all called Avraham, they were all called Yitzchak, they were all called Yaakov, makes sense because we're all their descendants. But why should we all call Yosef? We're not all descendants of Yosef. Only a percentage of us is called Yosef. And the answer is, we are called Yosef because from Yosef we draw the power to survive Golus. Yosef is unique. He's not Avraham, he's not Yitzchak, he's not Yaakov, he's Yosef. Yosef is a prototype or an archetype. He's a model for the best of the survival of the worst. The most comprehensive way to deal with the worst situation is Yosef. Hashem Matzliach b'yodei, Hashem Matzliach. These are all ideas that we already learned this year. Yosef is the ultimate manager of Golus. He manages Golus so well that he personally turns out to be an Adam. So every Jew, at any point in history, when you're talking about survival of Golus, the title which denotes us is Yosef. That's today's topic. And I'm reading inside. Re'eh Yisrael ha'azina noyeh k'tan Yosef. Shepherd of Israel, listen. Noyeh katzayin, lead like sheep. Yosef. What does the word Yosef mean? The Jewish people. You're talking to Hashem. You're calling Hashem Re'eh Yisrael, the shepherd of the Jewish people. It says, look after your flock. But what word denotes the flock of Kal Yisrael? Yosef. Touch Rashi, it says in Rashi, Kol Yisrael Nikroyim Hashem Yosef. The collective Jew, all of us, whether it's Shevet Reuven or Shimon or Levi or Yehuda, and of course, if we're Gedei Tzedek, it makes no difference. We all have the name Yosef. Lefishu Pirnesam Vekilkalam B'mei Harav. He provided for us Parnasa and Kalkala. That means food and clothing and shelter in times of hunger. Yeder Inyan Gashmi. Every physical thing. Physically, Yosef provided for Yidden, Pashat food, begashmias. But if it's true physically, it's because it's this way spiritually as well. This is true here as well. All of us know that Yosef literally provided for our ancestors food, clothing, shelter, and so on in times of hunger. Das was the parnasa gashmias from Beis Yisrael. The fact that the physical parnasa of the house of Israel, b'mei harav, in the time of hunger, is given uphängig von Yosef, hung on Yosef HaTzadik. Nemtzech davon is radiates from the fact was b'mei harav beruchnius, that he sustained them, that he provided for them in times of hunger spiritually. And of course, the whole point of this Sicha is to go beyond Rashi and say, how is Yosef the mefarnes and mechalkel b'mei harav beruchnius, in the spiritual hunger? And the Rebbe continues. Rav begashmis is verbunden mit dem Rav beruchnius. It's understood that physical hunger is connected to spiritual hunger. What's the corollary? As a man and matzah and hell of it's a time and a circumstance of hiddenness and concealment. But it's like nit kein getlichkeit. There's no godliness, and of course, there's no godliness. You're not very close to God, and you don't have a lot to eat. When the Ma'ilum Yechadeh from Yosef, and then there's a guy named Yosef, and he has a special advantage. He has sufficient power to spiritually be a provider in times of famine as well, not only materially but also spiritually. So Yosef becomes a code word for Panasa v'Kalkala Me'arav, to help you deal with the hardest of times. And I continue. Yosef hat sich ausgeteilt von die andere Shvatim. Yosef is different than all of his brothers. How? That he was Adam. Yeah? He didn't live in a Beis HaTalmud. Der Mit was der einzige, he was the only one, was given in Golus. He was in Golus by an Ish u'melech zar, by a person and a king which was alien. Nishba l'beinu umas. He was captured among the nations of the world. First of all, als Eved beveis Potiphar, when he was a servant in the house of Potiphar, he was an alien. Und danach, even more so, als Oseh bebeis Aseh, when he was later imprisoned. Nor afilu and spectadik man, even later. He Shoin became the vizier, the second to the king. Nobody can raise a hand and foot without Yosef's permission in the land of Egypt. Is that aber given unter, even as Yosef became the vizier, he was always the second in command. He was under der Shlita v'hanhaga from Parei, the dominance and the governance of Parei, parenthesis, hakis le'egam mimeka, end the parenthesis. The seat, the throne is always above Yosef. Sein Shlita in Gans Eretz Mitzrayim, even his dominance of all the land of Egypt, is given als Mishneh lemelech von Parei. He was subordinate to Parei. So Yosef is interesting. How? He was always in Golus, but he was the eye of the storm of Golus. He always was right underneath a superior, Potiphar, prison, Parei. So he was in Golus, and even when he achieved prominence, but the nature of his life was such that he was always beneath somebody who was directly involved in managing his life. The Shvatim seinen given Reyetzai. The Shvatim were shepherds, gesundet for the Nyani Ha'elam, seven matters of this world. They're also in Golus, but they do the avoidance act. They stay away from the Golus. Yosef is in the eye of the storm. Asher Enken Yosef is given for Numen with Inyani Ha'elam, as opposed to Yosef HaTzadik, who was involved in matters of this world. Frier beveis Peitifar, first in the house of Peitifar. He gave him responsibility for all of his household affairs. Girls, 2, 5, 4, second column at the top. And so too later, in prison. He was in charge of the prisoners. Certainly, when he became the vizier of all of Egypt, he was totally preoccupied. So Yosef's Golus strategy, or Yosef's Golus circumstance, puts him right at the heart of the Golus. And he's managing the Golus. He's being Yosef HaTzadik, not by hiding in the Golus, but by thriving in the Golus. Right? And the Rebbe says, Yosef is not only different than his brothers in this respect, that his brothers sort of hid from the Golus, and Yosef is in the eye of the storm. Yosef is different than his fathers in this respect. Even though Yaakov Avinu went into Golus, and I'm reading top of page 255. Tzivishin the Gimel Ovis. Amongst the three fathers is Yaakov, der Einziger, was a durchgemacht asach Yoren from Golus V'Shibud. The father who survived, or who's defined by surviving Golus, is Yaakov. Das is der Uftu von Yaakov Midas HaEmes, which of course is what's so special about Yaakov Avinu, that he's Emes. What does Emes mean? It never changes. In Velchas is nit shayach kein shinoy, it never changes. So even in the darkest of times, he's the same. Was der Vater bleibt mit demselben Teukif. Yaakov Avinu remains with the same authority, with the same power, in verschiedene Umstände, under various conditions, b'li shum shini, with no change, afilu in dem Golus by Lavan v'chulu, even in Lavan's house, he's also the same. So Yaakov is also a Golus personality. Says the Rebbe Afal Pikein, second column, 255, nevertheless, is Feran Achiluk, Ikri, Tzivishin Yaakov and Yosef. There remains a difference between Yaakov and Yosef. So Avraham and Yitzchak were never in Golus. Yaakov may have been in Golus, but it's a different approach, different model. Yosef's Golus Yosef's management of the Golus is very, very, very unique. How is it unique? So we read like this. 255, second column. And remember, if you just put your finger where the lines are, you won't get lost. By Yaakov is, it may be true that Yaakov was in Golus, however, or in Golus by Lavan. He was in exile by Lavan. Is that his business was not the world. He was in Golus by Lavan, but he wasn't worried about the world. It wasn't his job. Even in Golus, he survived the Golus by running away from the Golus. How? He was a shepherd. That was his chosen profession. Was his canal, and being a shepherd means an avoida by Velcha 256 now. It's a service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through which man can bleiben bis boidedus v'nyane ha'ela. Yaakov in Golus is hiding in his way. Okay, bottom of the first column 256. Zayendik begolus bebeis Lavan. Notwithstanding he was in exile, he was in a foreign land and in a foreign house, is nid given shayach ba'im came in v'cheshach ha'elam. The darkness of the world never reached him because he avoided it. Top of the second column 256. Und das is the Utuf in Yosef. Now you understand Yosef, not just by contrast with his brothers, not just by contrast with Avraham and Yitzchak who avoided the Golus, but even by contrast from Yaakov. By 257 at the top now, by Yosef is given a Yerido in Golus. Yosef went into the Golus. Be'efan is gekommen unter der Schlitte von Potiphar. He subjected himself. He submitted himself to the dominance of Potiphar und noch Pare and later Pare. And he stayed in that position. He stayed there. Und at the same time, as Eichen Azamatzah, even under those conditions, is a geblieben betachas vegas nelakus. He remained altogether attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore Yosef is the ultimate Golus navigator. He doesn't avoid the Golus, he manages it. He transforms it. He halifies it. He more than survives. And now the Rebbe finishes the Sicha. And this is the reason. Is the koyach was jeder Yid hat. The power that every Jew needs and has. Durchgehen inyan Golus, to go through Golus. Because by jeder Yid, there's the inyan Golus kipshute, that each of us, Golus is a literal and actual thing. Tacha shlites umes, right? We are under the dominance of other nations. And we are subject to those nations and their laws, especially in America. You know, in the shtetl in Russia, you could say there was a considerable amount of isolation. The Golus that we face today is extraordinary because no Jew can hide. You got to live in the world. I want to tell you, yesterday somebody sent me the most remarkable 5 lines. In 1964, the Rebbe said, the last Golus is the Golus of freedom. The Eibishter gives Jews freedom and says, I want to see if you want Mashiach. And he says, the Jews in Russia are not going to bring Mashiach. The Jews in America, the Jews in Australia, and the Jews in other free countries are going to bring Mashiach because they have this test of freedom. And the Rebbe went on to say that he doesn't think we're doing that well, but we are very close to Yosef's type of Golus. You could say that our ancestors in the shtetl had the Shvatim type Golus, or even the Yaakov's type Golus. Our Golus is very much, we're integrated into the world, and we need to survive. The power for that comes from Yosef. Umehai Taima, for this reason, second paragraph from the top of 257 is the Keach, but Yeder Yid Hat. The power that every Jew has, if Durach in Inyan HaGolus, to survive Golus. But by Yeder Yidin is the Inyan HaGolus, Kipshuti, we experience Golus actually. Tachas Shlita is under the dominance of other nations. Says the Rebbe Demtzach V'ikef and Yosef Dafka. Yosef gives us this power. And the way it goes is, first you say Reya Yisrael, he's the shepherd of Israel, and then you say Neya Katsen Yosef. Zok men fried de Meile von jeden Niden als Yisrael. Jews are special. Yisraelism kann das matuch. But das ist the Meile, was jeder Yidel Yisrael von Yaakov. Yaakov will give us the Meile of Yisrael. Second column, page 257. However, when the Nog Zok with them Hecher anyway, you want to know what a Jew really is? He's a survivor. And he thrives in places of survival. And the allusion to the Jew that manages that is Yosef. Ne'ekatzein Yosef. Dem Ili von Yosef. The uniqueness of Yosef, was es verrat b'chol echad ve'echad, that every Jew has. Was mitzad dem, that because of the Yosef property in each of us, is afilu v'yidin zaynen in dem cheshach v'helu v'hester v'golus. Even as Jewish people are in the darkness and the hidden and fulfillment of Golus. It does nit mevalbo their dveikus b'Hashem. It doesn't interfere and offset their cleaving, their attachment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Und sie seinen ganz in their Yiddishkeit v'chulu, their whole in their Yiddishkeit. This is represented by Yosef. And the Rebbe always used to say, Frierdiker Rebbe's name was Yosef because he's in the same image. And the Frierdiker Rebbe represents thriving in Golus, like Yosef HaTzadik.